Good afternoon, folk. Welcome back to a Chart Nerd technical analysis video. Today we will be covering the talk of the town, Ethereum. The ticker is ETH against USD on the daily time frame. Before I start, this video is not financial advice and is all for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you do enjoy the content, however, please do give it a like, a thumbs up. Hit that notification bell, and maybe even subscribe if I'm lucky. So let's talk. Yesterday we had the confirmation of the Ethereum ETF launches, and we saw yesterday yesterday's candle was very, very sort of in the middle. You can see we had this bodied candle close, and we sort of pumped up to 3.9k, but also within that day had rallied back down to 3.5. So a lot of volatility in the markets, and I don't think that's to be unexpected in a time like this. Again, there was a lot of speculation, and I think for the last few days we have seen some sort of buy the hype into the news event. Now, are we going to see a sell-off? I think this is the biggest question here for Ethereum. And a telltale sign that we could analyze and have a look at is what happened to Bitcoin on its ETF launches on the 11th of January this year, and what the price did then. Now, I will look into this in a bit more detail, but I wanted to have a little breakdown on Ethereum in regards to the charts, because there's things here that are pointing out to me that this breakout wasn't to be unexpected either, regardless of the news of the ETF. Again, if we look at the data here and take out the social risk, if we look from January of 2024, where Ethereum actually really started to take off and put in an impulsive move here up towards the 4k range, we didn't really slow down throughout this impulsive move. We had a couple of days pullbacks here and there, but really and truly it was just one really steep incline of price. Now, from this March high, we then topped out at 4k and started forming a falling wedge, where you had this resistance point and you had this support line. There was multiple points of contact on resistance and multiple on support. In fact, we had a lot more points of contact on support than we did on resistance. It only took 1, 2 on the third time of hitting this resistance to break it, whereas support, we was down here once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, several times. But nonetheless, all we've done is come up from this low here in January, created a really impulsive move, corrected back down to a key level of support, and on this third attempt of breaking resistance, we've just melted out. And we did have this really, really large God candle here, and I think, again, in confluence with the buying the hype of the ETFs and the breakout of resistance on this falling wedge, ETH just didn't slow down, and it rallied up to 3.9k yesterday, and yesterday's candle was very indecisive, and there's a lot, I think I said before, there's a lot of volatility to be expected around these times. Now, if we go back to look at Bitcoin and see what happened after its ETF launch, and sort of give us a prediction, maybe, are we going to see something similar to ETH? Could it be? Let's have a look. Let me dive into the Bitcoin chart for you guys and show you what I'm talking about. So with Bitcoin, we had the ETF launches on the 11th of January. Bitcoin was at 49k, and over the space of 2 weeks from the actual launch, it was actually around 12 days, we crashed around 21% back down to 38. So from 49k to 38k. Is it a telltale sign that ETH could be something similar, where ETH had this impulsive move up to its ETFs on the hype, and right now, because of the ETFs launching, are we about to see some sort of corrective move for ETH back down to a key level of support before melting out on this sort of news, and where this big money is going to come flowing into the markets? I think this is a potential, but I don't think that Ethereum will have as much of a deep correction as what Bitcoin went through, and I will explain why. Now, if we look at the Bitcoin chart here, Bitcoin had this key level of resistance back in December of 2023 that it needed to break out of, right? We was hovering around here in November, December. It wasn't until early December, where we actually broke that resistance out, and on the ETF hype rallied up into the news of the release, and then we literally crashed after that 21% back down to 38k. Now, what I wanted to point out is we had a high before put in here in December for Bitcoin, and the news of the ETF put in a higher high for us, and then we crashed 21%. Fast forward back to Ethereum now. What you'll notice with ETH is that we've put in a lower high on the ETH ETF news than we did with the ETF news on Bitcoin. So Bitcoin had already put in a higher high on the news of the ETFs. When those ETFs came about, it crashed 21%. So Bitcoin had already put in a higher high than its previous high on the news alone before the ETFs were accepted. If we look at ETH is sitting underneath the prior high on the acceptance of the news. So the fact that Bitcoin was a bit more overextended and then crashed 21%, do I think ETH's going to crash 21%? I don't think so, but I think ETH has a key level of support that it's trying to get back down to. And I think we will see Ethereum revisit, where was I looking? I think it was about 3.2k. I do believe Ethereum will backtest this area for support on this ETF news. And if it was to do so, if we go from when the ETFs were actually launched yesterday, you'd be looking at a 17% correction. Now, why am I thinking that this will be a key level of support for Ethereum on this news here, where I am expecting a pullback? Why do I think this level? Well, we did have a double bottom here in this foundational level of support, which we was holding for a couple of weeks here. So from the 13th of April towards, actually for a whole month, we sort of hovered around the 2.8k range, and we started building this base under resistance. And this breakout target from this level of resistance to the support, as you can see, was where the candle closes met the technical target. So this double bottom inside this descending falling wedge, so we got the falling wedge after this impulsive move into a falling wedge. Within the falling wedge, where we started to form the bottoming structure was from April into May, and we formed this double bottom. We broke the double bottom, have now met the target as well, and we've put in a lower high than this high back here in March on the news of the ETF launch. So for me, it would have taken the ETF news to tackle this high out for me to see continuation. But because of the news and the fact that we haven't taken out this high on the launch and the hype of the launch, I do think that before we do attack this high, we have key levels of resistance to back test and pull back to support on. Now, if I go from this high back down to this wick low in May here, which was the foundational low of this corrective move, you'll see that right in the middle of my target line is the 050 and the 0618, ranging between 3.3 to 3.2k. And the 050 actually backtests this wick high here. So for me, it wouldn't be a surprise to see ETH off of this news start correcting here, maybe another 10-12%, and scare people out of the market. But all you'll be doing in theory is reacting off the sell-off of this news, back testing this falling wedge for support, coming back to the golden ratio from this high back down to the local low of May, and then looking for your continuation out of here, where I think you will start to attack this high. So regardless of the social risk, there's things to consider. Again, I mentioned this double bottom. We've broken out of that resistance, broken out of this descending resistance equally at the same time, melted up in a God candle on the hype of the release of the ETFs. The ETFs have now come out. I think there should be a sell-off, correcting back down to this God candle for support on this key line here at 3.2 to 3.3k for Ethereum, turning this previous resistance into support, looking for continuation of the trend. So that's my outlook. And I think, as I said, regardless of Bitcoin coming down 21%, they were in different positions at time. Bitcoin had a higher high than its previous high when it did launch its ETFs, and then it crashed. So I don't think we are going to see as much of a correction here, but nonetheless, I do think we could see some pullback over the next few days to week to a key level of support for ETH, back down on this double bottom at this crossroads where we broke out, come back for support, look for continuation, potentially, on the grand scheme of things, potentially, just from looking at what I've drawn here, if we could build some sort of, at this neckline, you've got a left shoulder, right here we've got a head up to resistance, come back for a right shoulder of support, and form some massive inverse head and shoulders. So just to clear that up on the chart, I'll get this in for you now. Potentially you've got this left shoulder here into resistance, you've got the head into resistance, and then if we do pull back to that 3.2, 3.3 range, and come up, I think this is where we could form some sort of right shoulder under resistance and look for the breakout, which could take Ethereum, once it does break resistance, up towards 5k. Now, is that any sort of confluence to us? Well, we could get a fib on from the low and this head back up to this high. So if we get a fib on from this low back up to this high, what you'll notice is that 5k, once this all-time high is broken for Ethereum, then we're looking for 5.1k. And that could be off this potential inverse head and shoulders pattern that's forming right now. And if I take this head off, what you'll notice is that right now Ethereum is actually holding the 050 at the 0618 at 3.5. So if ETH fails to come below this and holds here at 3.5, this might actually be the low before looking to attack the high. But nonetheless, I do think because of the sort of buy the hype, because of this God candle where Ethereum's broke out, I think it would be quite nice to see a pullback to 3.2/3.3, hover around a bit, form that sort of right shoulder for the inverse head and shoulders, and then look to break this high at 4k and pushing onto the inverse head and shoulders target I showed you at 5.1 up here. So I think that's my targets right now. I'm expecting a pullback to 3.2/3.3, holding support of that range, putting a higher low in, back testing this previous double bottom pattern we spoke about earlier, coming back for support, attacking the high, and then rallying on to higher price targets in the near future to latter part of this year. Hope you enjoyed the content, guys, from Chart Nerd TA. Sorry it's a mess. Take care. Peace out.